Hi folks, I'm John Dunn of Melior Via, RPG freelancer and publisher, and I'm here at Immortals Inc. Along with Mikey, who's operating the board tonight.
What's up, everybody?
Carlos asked me to come in and chat a bit about some role-playing game stuff, since that's kind of what I do. And I thought one of the things I'd like to talk about is the Impossible Landscapes campaign for Delta Green. Currently in the middle of running this one with my home group, but don't know how many people know much about Delta Green, don't know how many people know much about Impossible Landscapes, so I thought I'd give a little bit of a eye-opening session on it for you.
I for sure don't know much about it, so I'm ready. I'm all ready for this.
Good deal. So, first off, Delta Green is a setting that came out in the 90s for the Call of Cthulhu campaign, role-playing game system, and it was published by a group of guys who go by Pagan Publishing and Arc Dream Publishing now. And originally, it was just a supplement for Call of Cthulhu, but the gist of it was that it was a modern setting. So it tapped into the whole modern zeitgeist back in the 90s, a lot of conspiracy theory, a lot of X-Files stuff. So
we love those.
Yeah. So your characters tended to be a lot of people who knew a whole lot about federal government, had a lot of connections in law enforcement. And what they were doing was trying to protect the population at large from supernatural entities and manifestations. And those took on a lot of different forms. The setting grew a lot. And the guys that were running it kept running into issues where they couldn't keep books in print, right? So they'd get a print run done and it'd sell out. And then they'd say, well, do we want to reprint that or do we want to do something new? And so that was a problem for a while until Kickstarter and crowdfunding came around, and they ran a couple of really massive, really successful campaigns, and it managed to really, on the order of multi-million dollar campaigns, and they managed to really get a foothold in the business and get some of their stuff out there. And when they did that, they said, hey, we don't really need to just be a supplement for Call of Cthulhu anymore. We want to do our own rule system. And so that resulted in the Delta Green system. And they really delved into a lot of the different conspiracy stuff, talking about a lot of different angles on things where characters can be members of different organizations. And the whole time, though, that they're doing this, they're trying to keep their investigation secret, just because the more people that find out about it, the more dangerous it is. I mean, it gets into the whole conspiracy theory element. But it also has a consequence for these guys because they're learning about things that isn't healthy for anybody to know anything about. And they kind of tend to go insane on it. And, the day job doesn't always want to pay for these problems and doesn't always want to give them time off to do the investigating. That's just a Delta Green. Delta Green's this is their first really big, heavy campaign, but they've got a lot of adventures out there for it, too. And you guys have a few books on the shelf that are adventure compilations for Delta Green, but the game system itself is 2 books. There's basically a player's book and a game master's book, and they come together in a slipcase. I'm not sure if you got the slipcase on the shelf right now or not, but
I'm not sure either. But
pretty cool set.
Immortalsinc.com.
Absolutely. Impossible Landscapes is a very specific campaign for it. And it's ostensibly 4 adventures, but let me tell you, my group's been playing this for about 3 months now, and we haven't finished the second adventure. That's a once-a-week group. It's pretty meaty. I mean, you can see big old thick book. I want to say it's approaching 500 pages. Let me check, though. I may be lying to you. I'm approaching 400 pages. And this one in particular plays into the King in Yellow, which I think is hiding up here somewhere.
Right behind you.
All right. And the King in Yellow is a part of Lovecraft's mythos, but he wasn't the one that came up with it. It was originally written by a guy by the name of Robert Chambers back in the 19th century. And when Lovecraft was doing his thing and developing his own mythos, he came across Chambers' work and said, wow, this is pretty wild. Because The King in Yellow is an anthology, and the idea of the anthology was that it talked about a play called The King in Yellow, and the people who went to see the play became obsessed with it and went kind of crazy. And those short stories are all out there in the public domain. You can find them in any number of publications, and they're worth checking out. When Lovecraft got a hold of this, he kind of leveraged it a little bit and tied the King in Yellow into one of the elder gods of his mythos, and that's the elder god whose name we don't say.
For what reason?
The gist of it is when you say his name, you're kind of invoking him.
Ooh, yeah,
we don't do that. Right.
Moving on.
Moving on. So we just call him the King in Yellow. The neat thing about this particular campaign and the whole idea of the King in Yellow is that the more you know about it, the more it infests your life. And that's both the entity and the storyline. And so the book opens up with recounting all the instances that are known of Delta Green having interactions with the play. And the guys at Arc Dream did a fantastic job of just building that up, going back to, I believe, the late 19th century, and then building forward. So, like, there's a chunk of the text that talks about an NBC, oh, warning, spoilers, an NBC television show that they recorded that was meant to be a half-hour adaptation of the play, and the effects that had, and a off-Broadway release of the play, or adaptation of the play, and how that went, and the things that happened to the people that were involved in those different productions. Once you've got that background and information about the play and a little bit about the entity, it delves into the adventures. When the player characters come into this, the first adventure is set in 1995, and it's supposed to be their first introduction to the King in Yellow, and that first adventure is actually one that's been around for a while. I think the guys at Arc Dream published that one originally back in the 90s, and then they kind of updated it and expanded it a lot for this book and used that as the kicking off point. I did mention, I think, that the King in Yellow, the more you know about it, the more it influences your life. Well, that's kind of a meta tone that's set into the book itself, where as you're reading the book, it reveals more things, and the more you know and the more you go through the adventure, the more things that you saw earlier in the book have deeper meanings. And that's not always just in the text. Sometimes that'll be in the images or the sidebars or even some of the annotations that are written into the text in a couple of different hands. And so as the player characters go through that first adventure, they get their first exposure to the King in Yellow, and they get exposed to people who know more about it and who have learned more about it. As that entity just kind of takes root in their minds, some of them are going to, well, it's a Cthulhu adventure. Some of them are going to go insane. Some of them are going to die. And some of them are going to, kind of be drawn into the dark side and want to learn more about this entity and draw from its power. Obviously, depending upon how that goes, it can have some pretty significant ramifications for how your games go. But then from there, the next adventure has a 20-year skip where the player characters go off and do things on their own, and you could run unrelated adventures in between or adventures that are tangentially related. But when they come back, suddenly they find themselves right back in the middle of things, possibly getting more information on things that happened to them in their previous investigations, or giving meaning to things that happened to them in their last investigations, to the point that there's even opportunities for the characters to interact with each other 20 years apart. Game Master kind of needs to have given the book a real solid read-through in order to be able to leverage those things. Like, there's points where you go, hey, record some of the sound from this game session, and then when you get to this future game session, you're going to play that back. And I should mention, there is a ton of resources out there for this campaign on the internet. There's a ton of handouts that people have created on Reddit. There's a Discord server specifically dedicated to the campaign where people can chime in and say, hey, I'm having this issue, or hey, I created this resource, why don't you grab it? And some of those are for, traditional face-to-face handouts. And there's also a whole lot of stuff out there if you want to play in a virtual tabletop. So, ton of resources out there for the game. There are the 4 different adventures, and each of those adventures progressively push the limits of the character's sanity and also offer new opportunities to introduce new player characters in case the previous ones have gone off the deep end. There is a conclusion to this, unlike some Call of Cthulhu adventures, but the neat thing about that conclusion is that the players may just be driving the whole plot of things forward and perpetuating the cycle that they're creating. So there's a whole lot of moving parts here, and it really gives you just a lot of great opportunities to just delve into the King in Yellow and just introduce a whole new entity from the Cthulhu mythos to your game group.
Awesome. And this is on the shelves here at Immortals Inc., if I'm not mistaken.
You guys have it on the shelf, and you know what? Come out and grab it soon because Delta Green stuff tends to move pretty quick.
It sounds very interactive, too. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely.
Compared to, you know...
Lots of moving parts and lots to keep you active, keep a game group going for a long time. All right, thanks for tuning in.
And as always, immortalsinc.com.